Despite not having the same amount of titles as the Celtics or Lakers, it would be impossible to tell the history of basketball without the Chicago Bulls. The franchise has inspired the last two generations of basketball fans with the dynasty Bulls teams that went back-to-back twice, led by Michael Jordan and the youngest MVP ever in Derrick Rose. With the emergence of Rose, it appeared that Chicago basketball was back and the future was bright. But fast forward to present day 2020 and that bright future has faded. So what happened to the Chicago Bulls? In today's video, we'll be exploring how one bad event started the downfall of the Bulls. Now with these videos, we like to talk about the recent history of the team first to provide context, and then we get into the factors of the team's fall. If you don't care for the recent history, that's okay. There's a timestamp in the video that you can go to that talks just about the factors. But now, let's begin and jump into the 2011 offseason. Heading into the 2011 offseason, this Bulls team had a lot of promise. Just the season prior, the team finished with the best record in the Eastern Conference, making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals before losing to the Heat in 5 games. They also just had point guard Derrick Rose average 25 points and 7.7 assists per game in just his 3rd season in the league, earning him the MVP award. His supporting cast included Luol Deng, forward Carlos Boozer, and defensive stud Joakim Noah. The Bulls didn't make any changes heading into the 2011 season, but they made a few smaller moves. They signed guard Richard Hamilton in free agency, and then with 2 first-round draft picks added forward Nikola Mirotic and Marquette's Jimmy Butler with the 30th overall pick. Mirotic didn't play immediately in Chicago as he still spent time playing in Europe, but Butler made the Bulls roster. This roster had some promise to it and was very deep thanks to the talent on the bench. This 2011-2012 season was also the lockout year, so play didn't start until December and there were only 66 games as a result. The Bulls got off to a fast start, quickly cementing themselves as the top team in the Eastern Conference before finishing with a record of 50-16. Derrick Rose and Luol Deng both made the All-Star team, and Chicago also secured the #1 seed in the East. But throughout the season, the Bulls had some issues, but none was bigger than the health of Derrick Rose. He only played 39 of 66 games as he dealt with a variety of injuries. Still, Chicago did okay with the role players filling in and keeping the Bulls at the top. Heading into the playoffs, the Bulls would match up against the Philadelphia 76ers, and this was a matchup that the Bulls were heavily favored in. After nearly 4 quarters, it appeared that the series wouldn't even make it past 5 games, if that. But with a little over a minute left, the city of Chicago was dealt a massive blow. Driving to the basket, Derrick Rose injured his knee, and just like that, the future of Chicago basketball was damaged. The basketball world just froze, and although the Bulls won Game 1, the eventual news that Derrick Rose tore his ACL was much bigger. The Bulls would go on to lose the series in 6 games, but nobody could really care. Their franchise centerpiece and possibly the future of the NBA would have his career on hold as he recovered from an ACL tear. With the possibility that Rose wouldn't play at all for the 2012-2013 season, Chicago invested in guards in the offseason, including adding Nate Robinson via free agency. Chicago started off the season slow, but they once again had a good January that saw them beat both the Miami Heat, who had won 27 games in a row, and a Knicks team that had won 13 games in a row. Chicago would end the season at 45-37, good enough for 5th in the East. The addition of Nate Robinson would prove to be huge as he averaged 13 points a game and played all 82 games. In the round 1 matchup against the Nets, Chicago won in 7 games to advance to the second round and once again faced the Heat. And once again, they came up short, losing 5 games after winning Game 1. Thankfully for the Bulls, Derrick Rose would be ready for the 2013-2014 season opener, but he only played 10 games in the season as he dealt with more knee issues, including a torn meniscus. Change was on the horizon for the franchise during the 2013-2014 season as Jimmy Butler began to play better and develop, leading the way for the Bulls to trade Luol Deng to Cleveland in January. Once again, Chicago had a slow start, but a hot January and February saw the Bulls back in the thick of the playoff race. Chicago finished with a 48-34 record, but lost in 5 games to the Wizards in round 1. The 2014-15 season was the one that started change in Chicago, as Carlos Boozer was gone and the Bulls added Pau Gasol, draft pick Nikola Mirotic, and rookie Doug McDermott to the squad. With the emergence of Jimmy Butler, the signing of Gasol, their great depth, and hopefully a healthy Rose, Chicago was thought to be a challenger in the East to the now favorite Cavaliers, who just added LeBron. They would end up finishing the season at 50-32, good enough for the 3rd seed in the East. Rose and Butler would both miss a decent amount of games, but were both ready for the playoffs. The Bulls beat the Bucks in the first round, and with another great matchup against the LeBron-led team, Chicago took an early 2-1 series lead after a Derrick Rose game-winning 3-pointer. Unfortunately, Cleveland won the final 3 games to secure a 4-2 series win. After another season of not meeting expectations, head coach Tom Thibodeau was fired and replaced by Fred Hoiberg. Despite the change in coaching, the 2015-16 season would be filled with more disappointment and ultimately result in even more change. The Bulls went 42-40 and missed out on the playoffs completely for the first time since 2008. They were average the whole season and could never find true consistency. As a result of this season, Chicago shook up its roster. Guard Derrick Rose was traded to the New York Knicks, Gasol left in free agency, and Joakim Noah left in free agency as well. But they acquired Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade in free agency to pair with Jimmy Butler, and this mini Big Three was prepared to compete. That wouldn't be the case, however, as the Bulls finished at 41-41, but they made the playoffs as the 8th seed before losing to the Celtics in 6 games after taking a 2-0 series lead. The 2017-18 season was where things just got worse. Jimmy Butler was traded to Minnesota for guard Zach LaVine and a draft pick that turned out to be forward Lauri Markkanen. Rondo and Wade were also not brought back, so for the first time in a while, it was clear that Chicago was rebuilding. LaVine would only play 24 games during the season as he rehabbed from his torn ACL the previous year and was shut down towards the end of the year. This was the same season that forward Bobby Portis and Nikola Mirotic would get in an altercation, resulting in Portis being suspended and Mirotic ultimately being traded to New Orleans. With everything going on along with the rebuild, Chicago finished at 27-55 and ended up earning the 7th pick for the 2018 draft. With that selection, they chose Duke center Wendell Carter. 2018 was just more of the same with rebuilding, but LaVine played 63 games this season and continued to flash his potential, along with Lauri Markkanen doing the same. Chicago also traded Bobby Portis and free agent acquisition Jabari Parker to Washington for Otto Porter near the trade deadline. The Bulls finished at 22-60, and along the way, Fred Hoiberg was fired and replaced by Jim Boylen. The 2019 offseason could have been potentially huge for Chicago, as this was the same draft with Zion Williamson and Ja Morant. And after finishing with the 4th worst record in the league, Chicago had good odds in the lottery. They earned the 7th selection and picked guard Kobe White, who has played pretty well in his rookie campaign. Although the season is suspended, Chicago was 22-43 and looked at yet another losing season. There's so much disappointment felt in Chicago right now. Players are unhappy and some are being misused, and Chicago basketball is currently a mess. Thankfully, they're starting to make change from the old management in charge, with Chicago looking for a new general manager. But now that we've talked about their recent history, what happened to the Bulls? I think that the first reason for their downfall was without a doubt the health of Derrick Rose. There's no doubt that Rose is one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history, and his impact for the Bulls was huge. He was the key reason for the resurgence, and he took the NBA by storm at such an early age, accomplishing things that we may not see for a while. But him getting hurt in the 2012 playoffs derailed a potential final season, and that injury resulted in him playing just 10 games over the next 2 seasons. And in those 2 seasons, Chicago won just 1 playoff series. And the longer Rose was out, the roster was just getting worse. But it's so tough for a team to compete without their star player. If Rose stayed healthy, who knows where this franchise would be today. Remember, Derrick Rose is younger than Steph Curry. The second reason for their downfall would be, of course, Gar Forman and John Paxson. Gar Pax is a name that Chicago fans know all too well, and while the Bulls are finally moving in a different direction, the damage these two did is already done. For starters, the head coaching decisions that this management has made have been head scratchers. Thibodeau was good, but it was clear his coaching style wasn't a fit in Chicago, and in playing his starters over 30 minutes a night ultimately ran them into the ground and resulted in so many health issues. Fred Hoiberg was brought in and he made the playoffs only once and hovered around mediocrity for the entirety of his tenure. He wasn't a good coach at the NBA level, but I mean he was given a roster whose 3 best players were Rajon Rondo, Jimmy Butler, and Dwayne Wade. Those are all good players, but in what world is that big 3 going to work? And now they have Jim Boylen, who makes rotation decisions that make no sense and whose ways of coaching have not sat well with players such as star Zach LaVine. The team just hasn't been able to close out close games and win games at home, and a lot of that falls on the coach. He'll constantly throw players under the bus, make 0 adjustments, and they still to this day have no identity really offensively, even though there were promises of faster pace and more 3-pointers. The continued belief in him has resulted in lost seasons, and there's little to no development with the players under him. Lauri Markkanen, who looked very promising, has struggled so much over the past 2 seasons to find consistency, as Boylen has basically turned him into a spot-up shooter. The free agent signings the two have made are just sad as well. When was the last time Chicago made a splash in free agency that really changed the team? You have Dwayne Wade, Rajon Rondo, and Pau Gasol as the best, and those 3 saw a combined 2 playoff series victories. During the short Derrick Rose era, Chicago only needed a consistent shooting guard in their starting lineup to be able to truly compete and get over the hump of the LeBron-led Heat. And the best they had were Keith Bogans, Rashard Hamilton, and Ronnie Brewer. But this is just a culmination of years of mediocrity under Garpax. I could have talked about the 2000s and all of the moves that got them into the position to get Derrick Rose, but even then the team lucked into the number 1 pick in the lottery to be able to select him. Had they stayed out of the top 3 altogether in that draft class, we could have been looking at probably 20 straight years of mediocrity with no peak that they saw with Rose. It's just sad that the incompetence of 2 people destroyed 1 franchise. But with all this negativity, let's focus on the positives. Chicago does have some great young talent. Kobe White is a nice piece, and of course Zach LaVine is an exciting young guard to watch. Lauri Markkanen has flash potential, and if him and Wendell Carter can stay healthy, there's no telling how good they can be. And once they inevitably get rid of Jim Boylen, this team should be okay. There is hope, and for the first time in a while, there is light at the end of the tunnel, as there are going to be new pieces in the front office looking to come in and make change. At the end of the day, this is Chicago. They've been down before, they've had nothing, but they have hope and promise. The Bulls will be back one day, but as always, only time will tell just how long it will take for that day. This has been a video on the Chicago Bulls. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you're new, and as always, I will see you guys next time.